Hey, Reb, your microphone is muted.
Yeah, you're right. Okay. Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, reviewing the conclusion of the Hemshech, and we're on page 1399. And we've entered now into the Ur Hariya zone, which was the initial point of departure, just to keep the flow, when he began discussing after the Maimon Mirika Hashem Elokeinu, Baner Hashem Yishmas Adam, their mitzvah v'teroir, on page 1352, he said, Nidali Levayat Inyan, according to understanding Ur Hariya. And that's what brought us to Lavana, moonlight and the luminous stone, and the comparable levels of Mikra Mishnah Talmud. But now we're going back to Uriah, which is the real place, as I explained yesterday, and I'll continue to elaborate, where we're going to see this paradox play itself out. On one hand, it's a Mekabel, because you cannot see without an outside light. On the other hand, it's only a siyua. The eye does see. And the etzem koyach hariyah, the very power of vision that we were blessed with, doesn't have that limitation. The only thing is we don't have access to that. That's why we need light to see in the dark, and that's why we cannot see, we only can see a certain distance, like you said, 50 or 60 mil. And as he explained, it's not just a limitation of the keli, ayin. You know, sometimes you could say you have the power, but the keli, the telescope you're using, the binoculars you're using can only go that far. Here, the oir itself is also limited, he said. But which oir? The oir mispashet, the oir that extends. But the esem kachariya, like you said, which comes to explain a critical point in Ayin Beis in general, that pnimi, which is tailored and manifests within the kelim, also has a certain limit. But we want to have the oir that's higher than kelim. That etzem ha'keichariya, that doesn't have these limitations. But we have still not learned how to access that, but he's just making the statement. And how did he explain it? When he said in the beginning, that's called Mekabel, he said, Mekabel, that's the ha'ara seirariya. Aval etzem keichariya ain't b'chinas Mekabel. Now we see here there's a level of not Mekabel, that means something more fundamental at the core. But to get there, you need first to have light from the outside to illuminate the eyes. We'll soon learn what that means in Avodah. Right now, it's the physical examples that he's using of eyesight. Okay. And as we said, this is all connected to Malchus of Asiya. I can explain because Riyah is physical. Shmiya only hears the more sublime, the ruchnius of it. And that's connected to Eir Chachma, like he said. Because Koyach Hariyah is Mekoyach Chachma. So when you get to the root of Hariyah, Etzem Koyach Hariyah is Koyach Chachma. Chachma is a fundamental clarifier. Like you said, Chachma Brura. It both clarifies and is the level of Riyah. Chachma Hariyah. Riyah Sayin HaSeichel. Because Chachma is Eira Nefesh Amer called over, it illuminates everything. And it's not just an Eira and Gili like reflection, like you think sunlight. The Chachma that comes from Keser is like sunlight. No, it's like actually the root of Eir itself. The Etzem B'chinas, not just a reflection. Because Ratzon is Helam. Even though Ratzon is already an extension of the soul, says, here's what I want, but it doesn't reveal the detail, doesn't understand the reasoning, and it's like that. It's only Hamshach is Pashtus. The level of Gulgalta. The level of Gulgalta is the level of like the skull. Just want to see one thing we learned earlier about the Makif. 1 second. Give me a second. I want to see something that reminded me. Earlier, Golgalti compared to the world of Bria, which was the Gulim. No, it's not just, it's just going to confuse matters. I don't think it's connected here. Okay. That's not a Gilui. Chachma is Ur Be'etzem, Ur Meir. It's both a Ur Be'etzem, it's fundamentally Ur, and it's a Ur Meir, it illuminates. And from that point of view, from the point of view of the core power of vision, you can see even in the dark, and you can see long distances, like he said, from one end of the world to the other. We don't have access to that right now, because our eyes are the vision that we have is the Ur and the Keli. Well, we'll soon see the importance of this point. We haven't finished yet. So that's more or less a summary of what we went through. A little different order, but I summed it up. The calls out by Adam is possible, but be'etzem ein shemakbola klal v'reim is b'sefer elam v'sefer. And the same thing, I think. Let me see here. Yeah. So just as it is with distances, the same thing, seeing in the dark. And that's where we stopped, approximately a little more than halfway down, page 1399. I'll continue now. He says like this. I'm up to the line. It begins with Hacheshech, Kamoy b'mokam ha'er. So now he's going to take us back to the original point, because this now is going to also help explain this paradox of Riyah. Because remember, we see with our own eyes. Yes, you need an outside light to illuminate the darkness. We're talking about the Ur HaMispashit, the extended and expressed light, not the core. But it still was with our own power. So now he continues, and if you want to follow the text, you can go to ayinbeis.com and look at the PDF scan there. V'zeisi asiba, and this is the reason. Masha er hariyah sheba'ayin reyeh b'koyach atzmei. So now we're going to have like a deeper understanding. But we said the power of sight is that the eye can see. The nose can't see, the eyes can't see, your hands can't see. They don't have that power. The power of vision is exclusive to the eye. The difference is whether it's in the keli of the ayin, the koyach hariyah, as it comes down to the keli, there has its limitations, or the etzem koyach hariyah where it doesn't. But he's now explaining why the eye itself sees. Because you could argue that maybe it wasn't made that way, but you could say the etzem koyach hariyah, since I'm sorry, not the etzem. The koyach hariyah in the way it's manifest is limited. So he says, but because it's rooted in the etzem koyach hariyah, that's the reason that the eye itself sees. So even though when it comes into the container, the vessel of the eye, it has its limits, but the etzem koyach hariyah is there. And it originates from there. And the etzem koyach hariyah, like we said, is chachma, which is fundamentally a state of, he says here, mo'ir meir be'etzem. He doesn't compare right now to the sun, but if you think about it, that's what the sun is. The sun was created to be luminary that shines. But remember the tefillah, the prayer in Nishmas, when we say "Veinenu me'iris keshemashu kiyareach," that our eyes will shine and illuminate like the sun and the moon. We'll talk about that later, more details. But the point is that today that's not that way. Why? Because I limited today, but it's rooted in the etzem koyach hariyah. So what he's adding now is not that these two states of vision are not separate from one another. It's because that in the nefesh you have the etzem koyach hariyah. That's why the eye can see. However, because of the keli, there's a limitation to it. So it's not just an external thing. It's not just that the eye is but incidentally can see. It's rooted in the etzem koyach hariyah, which is the eira meir be'etzem. But look at my halavona, and here's the key difference between that and the moon. The parentheses he explains, not like the moon, even though the moon is called a moir akot, and a moir, it's called a luminary, not like the stone, the luminous stone. Luminous stone is clearly not a source of light. More luminous stone is absorbing, has properties that absorb and retain sunlight or starlight, like we learned. But the moon is a moyer. But still, it's not like the eye. Why? Because he etzem chashach. Because the levana on its own is fundamentally a dark state. Think of it like an asteroid or a planet. It's etzem chashach. Hanashagam b'koyach etzem b'chinas koyach nelam. So even though the sun is going to activate and trigger light, even the light of the moon, but it's coming through the sun, but the moon itself is, like he says, b'koyach nelam, not a koyach gilui. It is a koyach nelam of the Eibishter. That's why it's called a moyer, like he's going to explain in the next parentheses. V'agam shenikra moyer, and even though the moon is called a moyer means a luminary, a source of light. The shemesh levana and shnei ha'ma'eres hagdelim. The sun and the moon, the pasuk calls them, doesn't say there's one moyer and the other one is receiving or the other one is reflecting. It says shnei ma'eres hagdelim. And maybe this is a hint since we're learning it now. Tonight, tomorrow, Shabbos will be Chai Elul, called the birthday of the Shnei Me'eres Hagdelim, the Baal Shem Tov of the Alter Rebbe. Just as an aside, if you're Fabringing, you can connect it to that. But bottom line is this is called a moyer. So why are you saying to me it's a dark state? It's not. Then it's even more than the eye in a way, because the moon actually does shine. Today the eyes don't. So if you recall, go back to page 1353. He discussed it at length what it means, moyer. Moyer does not necessarily mean that it's giving off light. Moyer means it's a source of divine energy. There are two types of divine energy. There's a divine energy that reveals and a divine energy that conceals. And we learned that at length. Very powerful concept if you think about it. Now, it's true, the moon also gives off light once the sunlight is reflected in it. The two opinions, whether the moon itself has light or it's really taking the sunlight and turning it into moonlight. But regardless, that's the aspect of light in the moon. But if you go back to page 1353, he explained there's two different things. Moyer could be the etzem koyach, it's a source of divine expression. But it could be divine expression that's concealed, the power of God to conceal. That's also a power. And then the sun, he said, has both elements. It's a power of God, but it's a power of God to reveal. The moon is a power of God, but it's a power of God to conceal. Then something else comes into play, that the sunlight is reflected in the moon or absorbed by the moon, and then the moon also gives off light, called moonlight. So interesting, the Taich Ma'eres Hagdelim, you could literally, it sounds like the beginning of creation. Before there was the diminishment of the moon, there were two luminaries. They were equal. But if you recall, he said very clearly, much earlier, that even though the moon, even before the Chet, before the Mir Kalavona, the moon was also, on page 1355, he said like this, the Chenu Gam Lefnei Hamiut, Etzem Mohusa of the Levana were Mekabel even before this diminishment. So even when they were Mekabel. However, at that point, its light was as powerful as the light of the sun. But it's still a Mekabel, always. And then, as I just pointed out, on page 1353, he explains what means the moyer of the Levana. So, bottom line is, the Levana can be called a moyer, but it does not mean that it's a fundamentally light giver. It's a fundamental divine energy giver. That's correct. But it could be, like he says, koyach hahelam. And be'etzem mohusa, Levana is always a Mekabel, even before the. Continue the parentheses. That's why the Levana is Mekabel mamish, through and through. Riyah, we learned there's an element of koyach Mekabel because it needs an outside light to allow us to see in the dark. But be'etzem koyach is not Mekabel. Mashiach in the Milavoni he calls Mekabel mamish. Hainu she'ima ira me'ira shemesh, because the element of shining, of illuminate, is coming from shemesh. It has a power to reveal the divine energy of Koyach HaNelam, but not, that's a concealed power. The power of concealment, revelation of concealment, if you call it that. So the Levana, fundamentally, as far as air goes, no. The eye, on the other hand, as we'll see shortly, does end up seeing. It just needs the outside light to allow it to see, but it sees. But afim nema sha'eru era Levana atzma, and now go to the second. You could say, 1 second, maybe this works well, according to the opinion that it's not the Levana's light, it's the sunlight. But what about the Levana itself? That even if you say he's saying that the it is the moonlight itself, it's coming from the moon, he nizeu ayidesha era shemesh meir ba. Umo'erer era liyas bechinas era meir. So even if you say the moon has moonlight light within, dormant, within the moon itself, but it's without the sunlight, it's only through the light of the sun that shines within it and stimulates, triggers, and generates the light to become an illuminating light. Even when we say it's the moonlight. Ukamaya Isha, I see, by the way, this whole parenthesis goes all the way to the end of the paragraph. It's fine. Ukamaya Isha, he's going back to the example of male and female. So what do we learn? Like the woman, Hagam she is b'koyach ha'loda be'etzen. So she's not just a conduit for giving birth. She has the power of birthing. Besides the fact she has ovaries and eggs. So it's not just a womb that's carrying the life that was implanted in her, so to speak. The conception is happening within her. Yet, and she gives birth with her own power. Again, it's not just a channel, it's not just a funnel. Like the pasuk says, when a woman will conceive and give birth. Nevertheless, the very process to actually conceive, you need the egg to be fertilized. She cannot do that herself. That power of birth, like the moon, is a concealed power. Just like you need the sun to so stimulate the light within the moon, you need the male seed to stimulate the birthing power within the female, within the woman. Mashenkin ish, who's the mashpia, like the sun, he has the power begili. And I remember we got stuck here. What does this mean? Because he could also not give birth without a woman. There's no way a seed cannot give birth without a woman. You need both. But he does seem to say here, like if he stopped before this line, things would be clear. The woman, like the moon, has the power of birth. The moon has the power to give off light, but it's concealed fundamentally until the sun, so-called, triggers it. Same thing with the moon. But now he's adding, so with the sun, yes, the sun has light of its own. Where do you see the ish, the keich elod begili, and bekeich lehelin ma'atzmei? If I recall correctly, I never got full clarity on that. Or maybe I don't remember, but I remember that we asked this question, and I asked it, and it could be I came back with some speculative answer, but it's still and I don't remember with that answer. I mean, I can speculate again. What does he mean that he has the keich elod begili? Why is it more gili, firstly, than the feminine, the female, the woman? And what means bekeich lehelin ma'atzmei? What does that mean? Now, does he mean lohelin ma'atzmei? Maybe he means that maybe it's. So I suggested, I think then was that the man, the seed is generated by him. The woman, the eggs are more passive. Yes, they have the power of birth in them, but they don't have the power to stimulate anything. Whereas the man is the one that's so-called doing an action that is. I don't want to use any graphic terminology, but basically emits the seed that in turn, and that needs an action on his part. It doesn't happen automatically. It says, Ein kishel das. It has to be with concentration and das. So the woman's, in other words, power of birth is lying there like embedded within her being, but it's the male that's activating it. So the activator is action that is revealed. So maybe he means koich lahelid ma'atzmei, not that he can give birth on his own without a woman. Of course he can't. Just like we learned, the rain doesn't make things grow. The rain is a stimulant to make the power of growth in the earth to emerge. So maybe that's what he means, because he himself so-called generates, meaning here not birthing, but the seed, providing the seed that in turn stimulates the dormant power of birth within the woman. That's probably the best way to explain it. And I think, that's probably what I said back then also, because now when you read it again, that's what it makes sense. But bottom line is, he wants to point out that the Levana is not like the eye. We'll soon get back to that. He says so because it's etzem, it's koyach nelam, and he's giving the example of the tipas hatzchar and the seed, the male drop of seed. It sounds, when you're reading this, it sounds like what I just said. That in turn stimulates the power of birth in the woman. Yeah, I stand by what I just said. That's koyach mashpia be'etzem. Like in that sense, like the sun. The sun generates light. That light stimulates the power of light within the moon, and therefore the moon can also shine. But fundamentally, the moon would be in a concealed state. So I think there's two things about the moon. Number one, it's revealed, it's a koyach hanelam. Number two, even its light is not coming from itself, it's coming from an outside stimulant. It's the sun. The male is like the mashpia be'etzem, commotion is barely ill. We learned earlier, page 1352. Aval ba'ir hariyah. Now here's the distinction. But the light of the eyesight, harigam commotion b'chemer ayin. How the power, even b'chemer ayin, not etzem koyach hariyah. Even as it is in our eye, our ability to see, the eye is structured such that it's a light giver. Ein b'chinas Mekabel. It's not an Mekabel. It's an Mekabel because you can't see without an outside light to illuminate the darkness. But it's not because the outside light is stimulating the power of vision in your eye. That's not the case. Your eye has the power to see, period. However, the room is dark or the environment is dark. So the outside light lightens up. That's not what happens with the sun and the moon. It's not like the moon has a power to give off light. The sun is just shining and illuminating the darkness. The sun enters into the moon and it stimulates something that causes the moon to shine. With the riyah, it's not that way. Sharihu atzme harayah. Because the eye itself sees. And as a matter of fact, if you recall earlier, all the way in the beginning on page 1352, now I see why he said it. If you look at the second line of the paragraph on page 1352, he said, there are different opinions in Chassidus of how eyesight works. Is it taking a picture of the image and drawing it back to you? So there's an opinion that the eye actually gives off sparks of light. It's like the eye is giving off light. However, that light in a dark room is not going to work because there's no outside light that illuminates. So the eye is not an illuminator in the sense like a flashlight or like a headlight. So what it's a yetzim and a ayin. B'kol mokem ena atzmi. What he said there, that it's not an atzmi. The sun is an atzmi. The etzem koyach hariyah is an atzmi. K'mo Hashem. And it's also not like he said, not like the luminous stone. Shari Hashem. So if you go back there, he explains this more in detail. That the eye itself sees, however, like he says here, that should sort of see you a canal. But it needs support, it needs an outside light to illuminate the environment, then the eye itself takes over. So it's not that the eye is taking the outside light and using it to be able to see. That's not the case. The outside light is illuminating the area, and then the eye itself sees. And that's the distinction between the moon. Why is the case? Because unlike the moon is not a Eir HaMeir. The moon is a Eir, a Moir, but Koyach Nelam. Eir HaMeir is the sun, and the sun stimulates the moon. But the eyesight is rooted in the Etzem Koyach Hariyah, which is Be'etzem Koyach Eir HaMeir, which is Chochmah. Basically, Riyah comes from Chochmah. The Levana doesn't come from, but Levana is Malchus. That's why also in the lower, the second level, when it extends, the reflection extends into the eye in the vessel, though it needs support outside light, nevertheless, he himself sees with the koyach hatzmei, with his own power. And we'll soon see why this is critical. I already explained why, because this is the full integration and interface between divine and us. That it's not just that we're receiving, but we ourselves become seers. That's a key thing to keep in mind that's going to be very relevant in the whole bigger picture. So we integrate Torah to the point that we become seers. But in the beginning, we don't see. We in the beginning, I should say, we need the light of the Torah to illuminate our lives. But ultimately, we will become so integrated, we'll be like a walking Torah, basically, because the eye itself sees. And that is when it says, that our eyes will shine like the sun and the moon. Now, I understand, according to that, we have to understand why the moon, according to what he just said here. But as I said, I'll discuss that later. It's not, when the Rebbe Rashab doesn't discuss it, the Maimorim of the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe do discuss it, or we can derive from there what it means, and we'll get to that. But the bottom line is, it's two stages in the vision, but the eye itself sees. An example, just to make it a little more palatable, is a student. We know a teacher, as much as he teaches the students, he doesn't give the students seichel. A teacher is not a parent. The seichel of the mind of the student came from his biological parents. He has seichel. However, his seichel is not illuminated yet. It's not been educated, not been trained. So a good teacher, like the sun, begins like the sun shining, but the seichel of the student is not just like a moon. It's ultimately his seichel is going to understand the idea. He himself will understand it. He's not just reflecting what his teacher says. Initially, you could say the early stages, he's repeating what he heard. But at the end of the day, you want his mind. We learned about Koy Inish Adaita the Rabbi. After 40 years, you come to a level of understanding, but you yourself are understanding it. So it's become you. There's a very interesting concept that the Rebbe speaks about, why it says, the Mishnah says, that when you repeat something in the name of someone you heard it from, maybe Gula Leila. You bring Gula, like we see with Esther and Mordechai. That Esther repeated things she heard from Mordechai in his name, and that brought the Gula Purim. So the Rebbe has a very big question. So why do we find so much in Chazal and Gemara and so on? You don't always see a student repeating the name of the teacher. Sometimes you do, but often you don't. And his answer is a very powerful answer, because there's a state where the student has so integrated and so internalized his teacher's teachings, it's no longer his teacher's, become his. So while you're still a student, so to speak, yes, you should give credit to your teacher, and that brings Gula. But then there comes a point where you yourself become transformed by it. It's like the student has become the teacher, so to speak. Somewhat of an example. It's not complete, but somewhat of an example that is B'kayach Atzmei ultimately. And even more than the moon, and definitely more than the luminous stone, which is fascinating because remember, the moon was compared to Talmud. And Talmud was the Amirayim struggling to understand the idea through their Koyach Atzmei. And yet here the Riyah is even deeper than the moon's Koyach Atzmei, which we'll talk about again as well later when we get more into it. So let me stop here now for any questions. Could we finish the paragraph?
Did that hold true with Esther, with Mordechai, that she wasn't, she didn't know her husband or whatever was well enough to say it by herself? I mean, she was still in that beginning stage.
What's wrong with that? Like she was a messenger.
Just a messenger.
From Mordechai, and she repeated in his name.
Okay, but okay. So, but that assumes that that he.
It doesn't. You have that also. You very often so someone will cite it in the name of their teacher. The question is, why would they not? So the answer is,
I think
the answer is because it became so much one with them.
Okay. So that message itself was a new thing, actually. Okay.
Or even if she internalized, it doesn't mean she can't say his name. Just explaining why at times they don't. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So now he's going to bring this back to Torah, or I should say, what's the nimshal in all of this? What do we learn from all this? This was an analysis of how vision works. It's 2 dimensions where it needs siyua, support from outside light, or in the etzem koyach that's doesn't have any of these limitations. It's comparison and difference between the moon and this and the vision. But what do we take away from this? And as I said, you would think that maybe he's going to explain mikra. No. He's going to explain this concept of what a vision is, how central a role it plays in general Torah and Judaism. And this is just, some of you may remember, it's going to start talking about how the leaders of a community are called the eyes of the nation. Einei ha'eda. We're going to move to Malachim are called Einayim, God's supervisors. So he's going to now go into a longer discussion where you see Ayin, the eye, play a role. So this is a beautiful example of how Chassidus illuminates something that's so common. So if you ever need an example, people learn all the time. The words Einayim, the eyes, the mind, the eyes of this, the eyes of that, and the comparison of different things to vision. So now we're going to understand why. Because vision plays a central role in the way leaders lead their community, and in the way the angels supervise the universe under God, obviously, Hashgacha Pratis from God, but through his supervisors. So we're going to understand it all in a deeper way based on this understanding of Einayim. And that's going to bring us back to what about the neshamas themselves? Are neshamas seers, or do they need an outside light to be able to see? Because the fact that we have leaders, right? So then you could argue, like Kedach said, why do you need leaders? Every neshama is the chelik alekama mal mamish, is a divine soul, and has the divine power to be able to see. And yet we see that we need teachers, and we need Torah, and we need direction and guidance. All that has to be understood by this 2 dimensions in Riyah that we just established. And we're going to learn it's 2 stages. There's the stage where you're still receiving Mekabel, and you need an outside light to be able to see. Even then, you're seeing with your own eyes, but you still need that outside light to actualize it. And then there's a stage where we become so integrated, so saturated with it, that we don't even need that outside light because we will be giving off light. But that's, of course, a higher level. So all this is going to come now into the developed, which is the real theme of what the Rebbe Rasha began with Torah, what he wants to get to, because Torah is about illuminating Mamayla Lamata, the interface between the divine and us and existence. Question is to what extent that goes. So we're going to be learning how it becomes completely internalized. It begins with Torah giving off light. Hashem, who's the mashpia, the ultimate sefer, the author, gives us the sefer, the book, the Torah, that illuminates our lives. Then we have the process of Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud learning to understand it as good as we can. But then Radiance comes into play, where it becomes so internalized and integrated that we ourselves become so-called the light of Torah, the light of God shines through us, not just as an outside light that's supporting and allowing us to see, but that we become one with it. This is an overview in general of where we're going with all of this. And of course, when you think about it, that's the ultimate interface where we become one with godliness. Not just we experience godliness, not just that we see from the outside, not just that we live by it, but we become it. That's really what it comes down to. That the etzem koyach hariyah manifests in the koyach hamispashet in the eye, and that the eyes themselves illuminate and see. Now, some of what I just said is not stated explicitly in Ayin Beis because the Rebbe Rashab never gets back to it. Remember, what he's doing all here is all an explanation. He's going to come back to the Maimarim of Ner Mitzvah V'Torah, but he doesn't conclude the ideas. But what I just said will be discussed as a part of what I believe is the end, would have been the end of Ayin Beis and putting it together. But I just wanted, before we go into more in-depth learning inside, wanted to just put it into that context. So we will get back to that when we finish Hemshech Ayin Beis. You'll see I'll make reference, more than reference, to explain, based on everything we've learned in the other Maimarim, how does that play itself out? Ultimately, what would be so-called conclusion of this piece when we ultimately become like Einei Me'iris, Keshemesh Kireach, not just as a Mekabel receiving, being able to see due to an outside light, but more than that. So, but this is part of the picture of where Ayin Beis is going. So, for the record, what I said is based on not on the Ma'amar Kimi Kashem Kenu Amagbil Service, but more so on the Ma'amar Veinenu Me'ir Keshemesh Kireach. And it's going to be ultimately a confluence of both those Ma'amarim. In Mikashem Lekenu, he does talk about Riyah Shmiya, like we said, Amagbi L'Sheves and Mashpili Lirais, the Lirais, but he doesn't elaborate so much on what we're talking about, the Koyach Hariyah. And the Rebbe Rashab, that's one of the Chidushim here, he's bringing those two Maimarim together. So we'll see how that plays itself out as we continue. Okay. Unless there are questions, I'm ready to continue.
I just want to, so obviously the Rebbe is what you call an illuminary and has that state, but yet I was told by people that knew about the Rebbe, they still spent like hours and hours every day learning. So what was the what was he learning at that point when he was already a luminary? Is that a process that was supposed to continue?
Yeah, I mean, Torah is Ein Sof. As much as you learn, there's always more to learn. The journey doesn't end. There's no retirement, if that's what you're wondering.
Okay.
Even when you become a luminary, so to speak, it doesn't end because Atzmus and Ein Sof and reaching is always more and more and more. It's never the limits go away. We're just learning here. Etzem Koyach Hariyah is unlimited, really. So it's a process that continues more and more, and you keep on growing forever.
Gotcha.
I have a Hasidus applied question, which is the Indian of the eye seeing itself, essentially us being able to illuminate with godliness, Kiviyachol, like the Eibishter himself. That. Well,
I would say like the Shemesh Yirech is the verse.
Okay.
It says
Okay, thank you for the.
There's a truth to what you said also, but not exactly. We don't become God. That never.
Well, that of course, Chas v'Shalom. But this was actually the line of my questioning. Not do we become gods? God forbid. That's not my question. Along the lines of though, for the geula, for the redemption of the world, and the idea of making this world a dira for the Eibishter, that and to make godliness visible, etc. It's like we're the agents. We're God's agents. And the state of this world of reality, of our reality, becomes let's say redemptive, becomes part of becomes a world of Mashiach, when Mashiach is Mashiach, but because we ourselves make it so. In other words, when we become godly and we live life according to God's will, and we make the world be that way, then we are essentially effectuating God's will. And we're not God ourselves, but it's like we're conduits. And so
Good.
we effectuate that reality. So in other words,
Good.
when
That's good.
is
That's
that
correct.
yeah?
Yeah.
It's not like the tachlis of it all. Like it's in other words, it's not like some magic storm comes, magic storm of godliness comes, and all of a sudden the world is transformed because this magic storm of godliness came out of the sky, and then it, like like the flood, like the Mabul or something, lahavdil, but do you know what I'm saying? You understand?
Like the example I gave with the student and the teacher, that ultimately the student becomes like this, completely aligned, and like shluchish lon kamoiseh, so to speak, that you're a complete channel and conduit for the Mishaleach. Yeah, that's accurate.
And that's what makes this world. Of course, the Mashiach is real.
Adir b'tachteinim, yes.
Yeah.
That this world, the physical world, becomes a home, like a mishkan. That's a seamless, transparent channel of godliness into our being and world. Correct.
And we're integral to that. And until we do that, the world can't really be as it should be.
That's our mission. Exactly right. That's why we're here. Exactly right.
Okay. All right.
And each one of us our own way, our own talents, our skills, our gifts, our opportunities. Basically, instead of having our own agenda driven by self-interest or whatever it's driven by, you become essentially like a Merkava, a vehicle and a chariot and a channel for godliness. You're walking godliness in this world.
Yes, exactly. It's interesting, Lahavdil.
So if someone looks at you and they see you do chesed, and like mahu chanon afata chanon, mahu rachum afata rachum, you become like a living, walking example of what God wants of life.
Yes. Yeah, it's like
That's exactly right. That's in simple English. That's exactly right. The challenge is that we are being independent. It's not that it's to become that. As we see, even when we understand it well, I mean, it's beautiful and poetic and all that, we still have to contend with an animal soul that has its own interests, which is why we need the Nefesh Elikis to affect the Nefesh Habamis in this contemplation. The more you come to understand this unity of Shema Yisrael and so on, we'll learn, the more you can tame and harness the animal soul to go along with this agenda.
Yes,
just to
beautiful.
round out
round it out. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. I'm teaching now. I'm up to chapter 22 in Tanya. So very much that's the central theme there. How Anochi and Lo Yilach are central mitzvahs, and it's really about us being completely absorbed and transformed with divine unity, and there's no room for anything but Elokus. So there's a connection to so much. Well, this is the central theme in general of Torah, and Ayin Beis in broad terms.
100%.
Okay.
Therefore
the I based I'll just conclude because I see it's ready. We'll end here the class. That's why the I plays such a central role, because it has all these elements. On one hand, it itself sees. On the other hand, it needs an outside light to guide it and illuminate. And then as it develops and it becomes more and more acclimated and more refined, to the point that it becomes a seeing entity, as we'll learn. So the neshamas come down below, as we'll learn, it's concealed. The neshama, as pure as the neshama is and divine, it's concealed in the neshama beguf. That's why the neshama needs ner mitzvah and teira. As much as the neshama can accomplish on its own, it needs the candle of the mitzvah, and even more so the light of Torah, to illuminate. But then the neshama will be triggered. Once you get it going, the neshama's powerful light will become alive to the point that the neshama itself will be able to be mashpia to Torah, even though it began as a Mekabel from Torah. We're going to learn all this.
Beautiful.
This we'll learn inside. This it does discuss.
Yeah.
You follow what I just said?
10,000%. Yeah. 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So good. So it all comes together. Very beautiful, beautiful way.
It's just interesting. Though I kept trying to stickle a word in, but what you said is like 10,000 times more important. But I was just going to do a lahavdil on the secular approach to life, where essentially man, if you will, or humankind have made gods unto themselves. Like they truly are God. They are gods, and that's the problem here, is that they only got it part right. Yes, we are critical instrumentalities to transform this world.
Basically,
for the sake of
plays God, you channel God.
Well, that's so well said. Thank you.
Yeah. And also, we all know ego and arrogance and contempt and conceit and all these things become part of the problem. And we know where people can wander off when they don't have bittul.
100%. It's all about bittul.
I mean, look at the wars and the violence and the pain that people can perpetrate on each other.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So we'll stop here. By the bottom of 1399, new paragraph. And I remind you that Sunday and Monday I will not be here. I also won't be here Wednesday and Thursday. So next week, only Tuesday. And Friday. Is that what I said?
What about
yesterday?
Thursday?
Let me check again. Let me make sure I got it right. Sunday, yeah, I depart. Monday, I come back too late. Today is a class. Wednesday, no. Wednesday, only Tuesday and Friday next week. Okay.
Are you for bringing for Chai Elul anywhere? Maybe Crown Heights?
I'm actually bringing for someone's birthday tomorrow night in 5.
Beautiful. Are you still recording? I probably should have asked you afterwards.
One of our supporters' 50th birthday invited me to Fabring. We'll probably record it. Not sure what format yet, but
maybe I can ask you while it's still recorded. Have you been able to align the Chassidus that we're learning right now? Because for Chai Elul, Shnei Oros Agdolim, it's so in your face. I mean, not everyone's face. The idea of the sun and the moon and the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe. Have you yourself been able to align the Chassidus with, presumably Baal Shem Tov is the sun and the Alter Rebbe is the moon? If you follow the mashal, have you been able to align the Chassidus and draw the practical? How does that work out?
No, I have not. And I from my memory, I don't think the Rebbe or the Rabbeim did that. And it's a good question. It sounds to me, as far as my knowledge goes, that Shnei Oros Agdolim only refers to the first verse, where they're both great, and not one is the sun and one is the moon. Two suns in a way. So how that stems and how you explain it, that could be a Farbrengen. Because even though Chassidus Chabad was Mekabel, or Chassidus Klolis, but I've never seen it in that context, that it's like the moon receiving from the sun. But on the other hand, the Baal Shem Tov was the founder of Chassidus, and we do know that some of the students of the Maggid had a different approach, and they disagreed with Alter Rebbe's approach. But then we're told, Ata Yismach Yisrael, that it was the Alter Rebbe that ultimately really was Mechaven and captured the essence of Teres Shabbat, the Rebbe Rashab says. But I have not seen, it's possible some of the Rebbes may have asked this question, how that applies, if it does at all. So my answer is I don't really know, and you have to be careful because you don't want to in any way. We know the statement B'Shnei Oros Agdolim. We don't want to necessarily start overanalyzing if we don't have source that the Alter Rebbe is weaker than the Baal Shem Tov. It's dangerous territory. So that's my general
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask. Because like, if I for bring and I were to bring this to the table and say, like, you could say the
Well, I'd
Baal
say
Shem
what I
Tov
just
is the
told you now.
mashpia. Yeah. Say again.
Now, you can't really say the Baal Shem Tov is pure mashpia and the Alter Rebbe is pure Mekabel. It's not exactly correct. Now, maybe based on Ayin Beis, you can say they're both ma'odas because even when they were both powerful, equally powerful light, the moon is always a Mekabel be'etzem uhusa, but I've seen that apply to the Alter Rebbe. And what does it mean exactly? Etzem Mekabel. Of course, he was a student of the Magid. So was the Baal Shem Tov, a student of his teachers. So, again, I've not seen it explained, and I be careful how far you can go with it. You could always say, listen, that on Wednesday was when they were both born on Wednesday. Wednesday is the day when the moon, the sun and moon were created, the two Me'eres Hagdelim. And I don't want to say a euphemism or a cliche expression, but maybe it's just to state that two Me'eres Hagdelim and not necessarily go further than that. That one is like the sun and the moon. Again, I haven't seen it, and I would be careful before going to such an analysis. Something worthwhile looking for. The first step I would take is to look, is there anything from the Rebbe on this? Any letter, any answer, any sikha talk he gave? I don't recall, but that doesn't mean there isn't something out there. That's what I would look for. That's where I would begin my research. If nothing can be found, it's one thing. If you find something, obviously, then you can build on that. Just telling you the process I would take care. That's all.
Yeah. Well, I'm just trying to build a board for tomorrow, and I was going to say, the Baal Shem Tov is the primary, or at least the initiating mashpia. Like we talked about the koach halida of the car that stimulates the generation of more lakus of Chassidus.
Yeah, but you see, something I just said I wouldn't do, so I'm not going to do that.
Nice try, huh?
No, it's fine. Listen. You have free will. You can do whatever you like. I'm just telling you. Ask me. I would not do that at this point because based on what? On my own piece.
Well, but just the analogy, the idea of like Talmud, like Mikra and Talmud. Like Talmud is like Chabad. The Mikra, let's say, there's the Chassidus of the Baal Shem Tov, and it stimulates the delving intellectually, which is Dafka Talmud, which is Chabad of Atzilus, and delving into the depths and expanding it and going to the Etzem and bringing out the Pratim. It seems to me like it's a perfect fit.
That the Baal Shem Tov is like Mikra and the Alter Rebbe is like Talmud?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, but remember, Mikra, he also called the Mekabel. Just number one, from the Sefer of the sun was the Sefer, was the Mashpia. But what you're saying, I didn't say it's not correct. I just told you how I would approach it. That's all. I'm not telling you you're wrong with that comparison. Maybe based on that base, you could use that example. Not sure about it. I have to think about it.
Okay.
I just told you my process would be I'd first try to find is there something from the Rabbeim on this.
Yes.
If there is, that would be obviously a good foundation. If there isn't, we could simple about it. I think you're wrong. I just what I would do. That's all.
100%. Thank you.
I want to give it thought. It's good food for thought. Being the Chayel, maybe the Ayin Beis does help in that sense. Mikra Talmud. There's also debates about exactly when you say people tracing Rebbe's teachings in the Baal Shem Tov, they find it easier to trace to the Magid than to the Baal Shem Tov. But the Magid, on the other hand, is sourced in the Baal Shem Tov. Let me look around. If I find anything out there, if anybody finds anything on this, by all means, let's compare notes. I'll look around. I'll think about it over Shabbos.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Good Shabbos, everybody.
Page 1399. Let me.
You got to stop the recording.
Is it not 13? What is it? 1399. Where are we?
Yeah, correct.